Thank you. I think I will start a debate now about. I wanted to talk about this, the African Holocaust. I don't really know how to talk about it in a constructive way because it's really. I think it's really difficult. But talking about Hitler, it's really interesting, especially if you look at the history of the Olympic Games, the 1936 Games. To see that actually he was aware of the history of the transatlantic slave trade, and I think it's just from memory, so don't quote me, that he said that the Americans had started his job before, his work. Yeah. Before. But having said that, we often forget, or we don't know that there were as well Africans in Germany. And many were killed, and children, a German of African descent as well, were the victims of the Holocaust, and not only in Germany, because Germany had colonies as well in territories around the world, and populations had been erased, and I think it's not.
In Southwest Africa.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to point out. I forgot. Henry Box Brown actually was really famous, and there's a lot about him, and he toured as well, all over Britain. And what is interesting on the image as well is that you have another abolitionist that was here in Britain, is Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass is interesting. It's in connection to the theme today because he was talking a lot as well about the working class in Britain and comparing white slaves and black slaves. That's what I wanted to
Yeah,
add.
Henry Box Brown. There's loads about him, but this actual record has only been found in 2005. The record that he was back in Manchester in 1871. So
there was back. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So. On Frederick Douglass, I wrote a book about Frederick Douglass in Britain, a book of essays I edited on Frederick Douglass in Britain. And he's a really interesting character in that when he came over here in 1845, he also came back in 1859. The reason he came here was because he was in danger at all points, as long as he stayed in America, from the Fugitive Slave Act. As long as he was in America, he could be taken back into slavery at any moment. And he came here partly because he published his autobiography and that named names. So although he changed his name, he could then be taken back into slavery. And he did some wonderful speeches up and down Britain, including in many of the towns around Manchester. And in those speeches, he would talk about how glad he was to have escaped Republican slavery and was living now in monarchical freedom. So he had a kind of strategic way of talking about, how Britain, despite being this monarchy and apparently not being pro-freedom, was much more pro-freedom to him. And what he also was able to do in Britain, which he wasn't able to do in America, and he talks about it a lot in his autobiography, was to walk through the towns and cities of Britain with one white woman on either arm. And he said, if I did that in any town in America, I'd have been lynched. So we're not saying that things were perfect in Britain, but there was a sense in which, for Frederick Douglass, and he talks about it, he said, I've had a liberating sojourn since I've been in Britain. It's been a liberation for me. But I think that partly he was being quite strategic in this, in that he was sort of saying, he was trying to get rid of slavery in America, and so he wasn't wanting to upset the British. So there were a couple of incidents that did happen to him, which you could talk about as being racist, but he kind of swept them under the carpet as a means of kind of sort of saying, well, actually, my major thing here is to try and get rid of slavery in America. But an incredible story. He did about 300 speeches in 2 years here, in lots of places like Carlisle and throughout England and Scotland, and in Scotland and Ireland and Wales. And just he was one of the best rhetoricians of the 19th century. Brilliant, brilliant speaker. If you read those speeches, they're absolutely wonderful. I'd urge any of you to do that.
What's the book called?
My book. It's called Liberating Sojourn, Frederick Douglass and Transatlantic Reform. It's a book of essays on Douglass. But there's loads of books of his speeches as well you can get.